Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here, talking about elk hunting. I did an intro a couple of days ago about some of the pitfalls that go along with elk hunting, how to get your tags, what are you going to do with several hundred pounds of dead meat once you've got it on the ground, some of the realities that you may not have thought of if you've spent your life hunting whitetails or black bear or hogs down south, something like that. But I know most hunters dream of an elk hunt in Wyoming or Colorado, Montana, Idaho, any of those western states. It's an undertaking. It's going to take you a year or more to build up what you need to get ready for such a hunt. You can do it yourself. I have. I will again this fall, but I'm doing a DIY with some friends who live in Wyoming and have killed truckloads of elk. So I have that advantage. You may not have that when you go out there. Today, I want to talk about cartridges. Maybe you have a rifle that will do a perfectly good job on elk. Maybe you're going to need to set one up just specifically for the job. And, you know, an excuse for buying another rifle is not a bad thing. So we're going to talk about elk cartridges today. What kind of power you need to hunt out west. Stick around, we'll be right back. Okay, I came out of the basement onto the range today. It's another one of those 90-degree, 90% days here in beautiful Illinois summer this year. So we'll see how long I last out here without sweating out. Talk about elk cartridges and what you have for whitetail or black bear or hogs that you're hunting east of the Mississippi. It might work pretty well, but I really think you need more gun for something the size of an elk. We're talking bulls that can go 600 pounds. If you're hunting Roosevelt elk on the Olympic Peninsula out in the Pacific Northwest, they can go quite a bit more than that. Some of those bulls will go 800 pounds or more. That's a lot of meat. That's a lot of animal to punch through, get to their vitals, and give them a reasonably quick death. And that's what we owe any animal we hunt, to put it down as quickly as we can. I told you before in the first version, I've only killed one elk. So in some ways I'm an amateur at the actual pulling of the trigger, but I have been present at the killing of a number of elk, and I have packed even more out on my horses for friends and seen the results. And I've seen them hit with everything from a 270, we'll say, up to 300 Ultra Mags, 338 Winchester Magnums, 338 Lapua. So I've seen the gamut, and I have developed some fairly strong ideas on what you need to hunt with. And you might bear in mind that I also grew up reading Elmer Keith, and Elmer Keith's theory, of course, was always bigger bullets, bigger bullets, bigger bullets. A number of years ago, I was at the Spear Bullet Manufacturing, CCI plant in Lewiston, Idaho, to meet with a guy there about some projects I was working on, and to get a tour of the plant. And when I went into the engineering room where the guys were, you know, at that time just starting to do computer-aided drafting and the design of new bullets and things like that. Remember when the computers would print out on fan fold paper and you could make those great big long banners to hang around the room? Well, they had one that wrapped most of the way around the top of their workroom, and it said, "Elmer was right." Elmer was an Idaho guy just like them, and Elmer said you need big bullets for big critters. Now, I've done a lot of research on ballistics, terminal ballistics with pistols and some with rifles. I've had the chance to work with Marty Fackler when he was still active in the military before he retired. He's since passed on. So I believe very strongly in the scientific terminal ballistics testing we have now. That's going to tell you penetration, expansion, fragmentation. They can predict it pretty closely. But I'll tell you something else. There's more involved that science can't identify. And this goes into my beliefs of maybe a .45 pistol might be a little bit better than a 9mm. If you've shot steel plates, and okay, Dr. Fackler and Dr. Roberts are going to tell me, hey, that's not scientific, you can't put any weight on it. But if you've knocked over a steel plate with a 9mm and then knocked over an identical steel plate with a 45 auto, you've noticed the difference in sound and the difference in the reaction of that plate. The 9mm will wobble it and knock it over. 45 will slam it down. They have about the same kinetic energy, and most of the guys you see on YouTube, most of the gun writers that you read in the magazines, they're going to make sure they quote kinetic energy figures of a 338 Winchester Magnum or this is a 280 Remington. I have become convinced that energy has almost nothing to do with stopping power or terminal performance. There's a pounds-feet formula that you can work out, Taylor knockout. I really think momentum is a better measure of what that bullet's going to do to an animal or a human than energy, kinetic energy. It simply has no correlation. An example I will give you. When I went to Wyoming, I took a 300 Winchester Magnum, Ruger 77 rifle. That was going to be my elk cartridge, moose if I got a moose tag, things like that. It was a bad luck rifle. I mentioned in the other video, I'd lost a rear guard screw without knowing it. That I missed a couple of elk in one day because of that. I eventually sold it to a friend who wanted it real bad, and for a while hunted with a 270, which was my deer rifle at the time. I loaded up 150 grain premium bullets for it if I was going to kill an elk. Never got the chance to kill an elk. I always thought a 35 Whelen would be really cool. 30-06 case, necked up to 35. 250 grain Spitzer bullets. That's what I wanted. I wanted big bullets. And there was a buddy of mine who came out to Wyoming hunting almost every year, and he thought he was in debt to me, and he knew I wanted a 35 Whelen. And one year he brought me a 35 Whelen. He had found it at a gun show, and so this was a Mauser barreled action. It appeared to be an Interarms Mark 10 Mauser action, which was pretty popular at the time, but it wasn't marked that way. It had no markings on it at all other than a serial number. It had a barrel of unknown manufacturer, stamped 35 Whelen. It was in a unfinished fiberglass laid up stock. Said to be a Macmillan stock, but as I went into the process, Macmillan could not have built that stock because it was a very poorly made stock. I ultimately had to completely rebed the action to get it to hold that 35 Whelen. I lapped the barrel. I did everything I could to try to make that rifle accurate, and it just wouldn't come together. It would shoot perhaps 2.5-inch groups at 100 yards. So I eventually sold it and stepped up to, I don't like belted magnums that much, but my step up was to a 338 Win Mag. But that 35 Whelen, I killed two things with it while I had it. I killed a doe pronghorn antelope, leftover tag, just to get some meat. The doe was kind of running by me, say walking fast. At about 150 yards, I've always been fairly good at moving shots, so I tracked along on her shoulder, broke the trigger. It went high in her shoulder at a quartering angle. It skipped off the shoulder blade, it went into the spine, it traveled through about 5 or 6 inches of the spine of this thing. Talk about an instant kill. But at a slow pace of walking, breaking into a run, this 35 Whelen actually somersaulted the pronghorn on her feet. A full somersault, and just looked like you threw her to the ground. Now hitting the spine is a part of that, but there's something about those big bullets that really slap stuff around. And a couple of my buddies out west have gone from smaller calibers that were fairly reliable elk killers up to larger calibers, and one of the main reasons, one guy explained it really well, he goes, I've hit elk with a 30-06 and maybe they got in the timber or they ran over the top of a hill 50 or 100 yards and they were dead. It killed them pretty well, but I didn't know that I'd hit them. In one case, a guy shot a spike elk running down into a small canyon, wasn't sure if he hit it, and 30 seconds to a minute later, spike runs up the far side of the canyon, draws down, shoots, drops it in its tracks. And on the way to get the one on the other side of the canyon, he found the first spike that he had shot that went in, didn't go very far, and died. So getting a reaction when you shoot something like an elk, you know you hit it because they flinch or they stagger, that's important. So that's a reason enough for a bigger round. And as I said, that 35 Whelen just somersaulted that pronghorn antelope. Not a big creature, not that impressive. The next year, I was up on the mountain in the springtime and we had bear baits out. And I had a very nice, slightly above average sized black bear show up to the bait. It was a female, didn't know that at the time, but pretty good burly, mature bear. I was up on a tree stand, and at one point I heard movement to my left. I looked over to see if it was a bear, didn't see anything, and then suddenly all the hairs go up and down on the back of my neck, and it's like, there's something there. I looked over very slowly, and there was the bear at the foot of the ladder for the tree stand, looking up at me with a woof woof kind of sound. It knew very well I was there. It circled in behind my tree and started to go away that direction. So I stood up on the tree stand platform. I had one hole through the limbs. And I thought, well, if the bear happens to come out into my field of view, I'll get it. But if not, I'm just going to see bits and pieces of it as it wanders, and I don't have a shot through the pine limbs. Lo and behold, it walked out at about 50 yards, right in the middle of my shooting lane. To this day, I don't remember pulling the trigger on that rifle, but it went off. I can tell you that bears are probably one of the most exciting things that I've ever been involved in shooting. That bear took off instantly, ran full bore about maybe another 50 yards, and sort of died in mid-stride, rolled over on her side, hit the grass, slid down into a little depression out there where I could just barely see the hair. I worked the bolt, kept the scope on it in case it jumped back up, and after a minute or two it didn't, of course. Here's the lesson I learned. When I got that bear back to town, my buddy and I were skinning it out in the backyard. And at one point, when the skin was off, the carcass was there, we were starting to quarter up the meat. He said, "Which side did you hit it on?" And I said, "Well, I hit it on its right side, right tight behind the shoulder, and went clear through." We could not tell by looking the entrance wound or the exit wound in the rib cage of that bear. Now normally with a smaller round, say a 7mm like this 280 or something like that, you can tell you got a small entrance wound and then a bigger where that expanded bullet has blown out a lot more material as it passed clear through. It was almost impossible to tell the difference between entrance and exit wounds. And the thought that flashed into my mind was that banner around the spear plant where they said, "Elmer was right. Big bullets make big holes. They let out a lot of blood and a lot of cold air comes in and it shocks that animal more quickly." That's my philosophy, and that's based on seeing a number of big critters shot over the years, even though I didn't pull the trigger myself. So, what do you need for an elk cartridge? Personally, I think the smallest bullet you should consider is a 6.5, 264 diameter. It's been a kind of an unpopular caliber in the United States for a very long time. There was a 6.5 Remington Magnum, there was a 264 Winchester Magnum that came on, in the market back in the 50s. They never really took off, but lately with the introduction of the 6.5 Creedmore, the 6.5 has become very, very popular in the United States. There are a number of cartridges for it now. Weatherby has come out with a new one. There's the bigger than the Creedmore is the 6.5 PRC. So we're seeing a growth in that 264, and I really think myself that's the smallest diameter bullet you should try. I used to say 270, but I think with the newer bullet technologies, probably a 264 will do the job. But here's what I will tell you that I think a lot of people are going to disagree with. Whatever you're going to use to shoot an elk, I think you should have at least 150 grains of bullet or more. And I think that bullet should be going 2,700 feet per second or more. That puts you into the 308 Winchester category. And friends of mine have shot a number of elk out west with a 308. One friend of mine, one police partner of mine who was a police sniper, he took his sniper rifle out one time with the 168 Match King hollow point bullets that snipers were universally using back then. And he had to shoot a cow elk about 4 or 5 times. Killed her. He found her dead. Meat went to town. But those bullets were not designed as hunting bullets. They're designed to punch match grade groups into paper targets, really. And at the range he was shooting, about 400 yards or so, easy for his skill and easy for that accurate sniper rifle, the bullets were not expanding at all. He was basically just drilling 30 caliber holes through the lungs of this cow elk. And then that's all the damage you do. It's going to take a while for them to lay down and play dead. So I think the 308 is a viable minimum 150 grain bullets. And with the 308, I would say premium bullets. So we're talking Barnes X, we're talking Nosler Accubons, we're talking Hornady ELDX. We're talking the better bullets you can get. One exception would be the all-copper bullets like the Barnes. I think Hornady has a new one called a CX. Nosler's had one called an E-tip for quite a while. They're all copper. The all-copper bullets tend to penetrate more than a lead core bullet. So if you're going to fudge in bullet weight and go down a little bit, I would use one of those all-copper designs because they're still going to give you the depth of penetration you need. Several people have asked me, well, gee, do you think a 6.5 Creedmore is an elk gun? I don't know of anyone who loads a 150 grain bullet. You can get pretty close with a 147. You can buy 150 grain bullets and load them, but the velocities are going to be very low. You're going to be under 2,700 feet per second. You just don't have the whoop, I don't believe, with a 6.5 Creedmore. If you are willing to settle for absolute perfect broadside, crack them through the ribs kind of shots, it'll work. I knew a game warden in Wyoming that had grown up killing elk with a 25-06. And in talking with him, I said, gee, that 120 grain bullet's not real heavy. He goes, well, I don't use those 120s. I use an 87 grain hollow point. That's a varmint bullet in a 25-06. And he said, but I never shoot more than 200 yards, and I always crack them right in the ribs behind the shoulder. I don't hit any major muscle groups. And his theory was that 87 was going to go in there and totally wreck that onside lung. And he said, if you wreck an elk's lung, it's not going to go very far. That's true. But how often are you going to wait for that perfect broadside 200-yard shot? Most of you are going to see a few elk on your hunt. You're going to take almost any viable shot you can get. And when you limit yourself to small caliber, small bullets, and close distances, you drastically cut down the number of opportunities you might have to shoot an elk. So I think that has to be a factor. I'd like to take a little time to do a little business. First of all, shameless plug for my book, my second book, Building a Better Gunfighter. I have a number of these in paper copy. They are still available on either eBay or on my website at dickfairburn.com. The first book, Police Rifles, is no longer in print, but both of these will soon be out in an ebook format, so you can pick them up that way. I would also like to ask you to please subscribe, ring the little notification bell, and if you like what I'm doing here, give me a thumbs up. That's what helps grow this channel. That's what helps develop more content for you that are interested in what I want to do. So I appreciate it if you could buy the book, if you can subscribe, ring the bell, and give me a thumbs up. Thank you very much. So with my philosophy of 6.5, 264 diameter or bigger, 150 grains or bigger, 6.5 Creedmore right on that borderline, 260 Remington, very similar, going to be right on that borderline. I think I break it down into standard cartridges and Magnum cartridges. Standards, for the most part, are based either on the 308 Winchester case or the slightly longer parent of the 308, the 30-06 case. So if we use that 308, 150 grains or more, I think that's a viable 300-yard elk cartridge with good conditions. You're going to have a broadside shot. Don't try to quarter that thing in at much of an angle, or you could see an elk go a long ways. And I'll tell you, I've seen elk hit with 338s. I've seen elk hit with 300 Remington Ultra Mags and go quite a ways before they were found and packed out later. I want to put them down as quickly as I can for several reasons. The country's tough. The tracking, if there's no snow, the tracking can be a little difficult, and it's just more fair to the animal. So the standards, 308, okay. 358, I like it better. Had a 358 for a while. But again, 250, maybe at the absolute most, 300-yard cartridge. 338 on the 08, 338 Federal, going to fit right in there with that 358. When you step up to the 30-06 length case, you're adding more powder. The longer cases are better able to handle heavy for caliber bullets. 270, great. 6.5 PRC with the right bullet, 150 or better, I think it's good. The new 6.5 Weatherby, same story. It's even more velocity. One thing I would warn you with elk, I think if you're much over 3,000 feet per second with your load, you're probably better off to go to the next heavier bullet. So instead of something at 32 or 3,300 feet per second, I'd go with the heavier bullet at 29 or 3,000. You're going to get better ballistic performance, better trajectory, be less affected by the wind, and it's just going to put more whoop ass on the elk with the heavier bullet. I settled on a 280. I had used a 270 for a number of years, had great luck with it on deer and antelope, never shot anything big with it. Once again, I had done a lot of things to that rifle, got it shooting really good, and a guy wanted it really bad, and I'd always wanted a 280. So I made a trade with my friend Jeff Hoffman, who is the guy who owns and operates Black Hills Ammunition. Traded him a lever gun, and I said, you know, what do you want for trade? I said, I want a Remington 700 stainless in 280. And at the time, Remington was putting a pretty cheap black synthetic stock on their stainless steel guns, and a buddy of mine had actually punched a hole in the side of the stock on a hunting trip. And I said, but I want it in an HS Precision stock. You know, that's a company that right there in Rapid City where Black Hills is located. Jeff and I, on several wintertime events, we'd gone over to HS, and they had a 100-yard tube that we could shoot in, so we could do some rifle shooting in the winter. I knew it was a fantastic, a little bit heavier to carry, but very heavily built stock. And so that came in, Remington 700 stainless, 280 caliber, the HS Precision stock I wanted. Scoped it up, started working loads. I settled on a 160 grain Nosler AccuBond. Very high ballistic coefficient for its day. There are even higher now with the AccuBond long range version. It's a bonded core bullet, so it's going to hold its weight really well. It's going to penetrate good and deep. That rifle had been, after I got it, I sent it back out to South Dakota to a gunsmith. He tore apart, blueprinted it. I wanted the chamber cut to 280 Ackley improved, and he had the reamer, but in the process of working on my rifle, the reamer rolled off his bench, hit the concrete floor, and I guess those reamers are as hard as glass, so it shattered. He long-throated it, so I'm able to seat my bullets out a good 100 thousandths or so, almost 1/10 of an inch further, and gain a little powder space. So I'm really getting the performance of the AI, the sharp-shouldered 280 AI. But someday I will probably still have the chamber recut and gain another 2 or 3 grains of powder in that AI. And when you do that, you're essentially firing a 7mm mag with a lot less powder and a lot less recoil. That's the standards. 30-06 length case, 308 length case, 280, 30-06 is a great round, killed a lot of elk. 3 to maybe 400 yards with the right bullet and the right shooter. To go to the magnums, the 264 Win Mag, you don't see them very often, but it's probably good. It's that 6.5 caliber. There are a number of Magnum level. There's a 6.8 Western now, which is a 270 kind of Magnum. 30 caliber Magnums. Several of my friends shoot 300 Winchester short mags and have great luck with them. I really think the 338 Win Mag is probably the ultimate elk round. Any elk I've ever seen hit with this, hit solidly in the chest, you know it's hit. It shows it. It's not going to go very far, and in the right kind of rifle, the recoil's pretty manageable, and they can be very accurate. Okay, we'll let the little rainstorm blow by. Back out here to finish talking about cartridges, loads for use on elk. There's another aspect of cartridge choice that, quite frankly, I hadn't thought of until I saw someone in a video on Kodiak Island, and they were hunting Sitka blacktail. The guide there recommended that you did not choose your rifle and cartridge based on what you needed to kill a blacktail, but rather you choose the cartridge that's necessary to deal with whatever the largest predator you may encounter. During the deer season on Kodiak Island, they very frequently run into coastal brown bears. So he said taking a light caliber rifle to kill a deer may not be adequate if you suddenly have to turn that rifle into a self-defense situation against a brown bear. So he recommended you take brown bear size cartridges, even though you're killing kind of diminutive deer. That's an interesting idea. Over the last 20 to 30 years in Wyoming where I hunt, the grizzly bear population outside of Yellowstone Park has exploded. Hunters would traditionally, if they'd kill an elk, a lot of times they would just quarter it, brush it over, come back the next day with horses and mules, pack it out. That doesn't work very well anymore because by the time you get back in the morning, there's a fair chance a grizzly has found it, consumed a good portion of it, and might still be there and decide that it's his, not yours. The downside to that is you've made your kill, you've had to punch your tag, you're done for the year. A couple hunters I knew were able to get out with the skull and the horns, the trophy, but really didn't get any of the meat. Even worse is when grizzlies are closer and you have made a kill, you're in the process of gutting it out, quartering it, whatever you need to do to get that elk out, and the grizzly interrupts that process. So your 6.5 Creedmore might kill an elk within a reasonable range, but is it really big enough to deter a grizzly bear? And every year in the western states of Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, hunters are getting crossways with grizzly bears. I mean, my number one scoring video so far is handguns for bear defense, and I think if you're out there when the bears are active, you need to have a handgun as well. But you might want a little bit bigger rifle just in case you have to defend yourself against a pissed off grizzly bear. Now the elk tag I have this year is really what they call a depredation tag. The elk populations have exploded in that part of Wyoming. A lot of elk are being pushed down by the deep snow up high, and so they're grazing on those hay meadows that the ranches use to grow hay for their cattle over the winter. They're grazing it to the extent that they're eating it down, roots and all, and they're essentially destroying those hay meadows. In Wyoming, because of some old case law, the state is responsible for the damage that game animals do. If a sheep herder can prove that a mountain lion killed his sheep, the state has to pay for the sheep. If the wardens come out and they see the grazing damage that's caused by the elk over the winter, then they have to reimburse that rancher what the costs are of replanting the alfalfa or whatever it is they're growing in that field. So to minimize that, when they have those large populations overwintering in an area like that, they give out more tags. And they are typically half price, sometimes even lower than half price of what a bull tag would be. They give you a lot of latitude. Now, the tag I have is not good for the whole hunt area. It's only good in certain portions of it where that winter depredation is taking place. But they give you a long window. The tag is actually good from, I believe, October 15th to December 21st. Now, my buddy has a couple of these tags out there as well, so we'll go out together. And he said typically it's best from about December 1st to the end of the season. There's enough snow to push them down there to where they're reasonably easy to access. He said it's kind of open country, so you got to do some reasonably long shooting, 300-400 yard shots. But once you've knocked them down, there's enough snow that you can go get them on snow machines, either snowmobiles, or in his case, he has a Polaris with tracks on all four corners. You're not damaging the property, you're just damaging the snow, so the ranchers are more than willing to let you drive out where normally they wouldn't let you drive. So this is a late season tag. We're planning on December 1st or after. The grizzlies are generally higher, and by December 1st, pretty good chance they're going to be in hibernation. So grizzlies should not be much of a threat on the hunt I'm going on, but I'm still going to fall back on my first thing, which is I want to hit them hard enough to see that they've been hit, to see that reaction and know that I didn't miss, so don't pick out another one. You got to stick with the one you started with. If you're in active bear country, you might want a bigger rifle than you would normally take for elk. The last issue, and this is the one you've probably all been whispering to yourselves or throwing things at your TV while I'm talking and saying, yeah, but some of those rifles kick like hell. They do. Lower recoil rifles are always going to be easier to shoot, especially for beginning shooters, especially for young shooters. And not picking on the ladies out there, but most of the ladies don't like to get slapped around with a heavy recoiling rifle either. So that's a valid point. The recoil has to be factored into it. That's going to depend on the caliber, the bullet weight, how hot your load is, the build of the rifle. Here's my largest rifle. This is what I consider to be my elk rifle. This is a Tikka T3 Lite. It's in .338 Winchester Magnum. I bought this when I could not get that .35 Whelen to shoot worth a hoot. And the interesting thing about it, you know, I bought this at kind of the end of the classic bolt actions. The Remington 700 was still available. The Browning X-Bolt is still very, very popular on the scene. Winchester Model 70. Now the 70 and the 700 were almost gone for a while. The 700 is going to be making a comeback. What we saw was an explosion of kind of lower tiered bolt action rifles like the Tikka, the Ruger American. Savage has some Axis rifles. They're very inexpensive. They tend to shoot pretty well, and they tend to be pretty light compared to the more classic bolt action designs. This rifle, when I first set it up, I had a Leupold 2.5 to 8 VX3 scope. This is a little heavier scope, but when I set it up, scope and all, it weighed about 7 pounds. That's pretty light for a .338. Now the recoil pad that came with it was a little bit stiff. This is a rifle that's never had a round of factory ammunition in it. I've worked up every load that's gone through it, and probably a couple hundred rounds of workup loads until I decided my hunting load. And a lot of that was from the bench, shooting groups to see where I got the best accuracy. I wouldn't say that it was painful, but it certainly bounced around a lot on the bench rest bags. So what I did was buy a Limb Saver recoil pad. It's a direct fit. I just screwed off the factory pad, screwed on the new one, It's very soft, it's very forgiving, and I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say it cut the recoil in half. This rifle is now kind of a big shove rather than a sharp jab. And especially when you're shooting at game. I've fired 3 shots at game from this rifle at a moose in Wyoming at 467 yards by laser. I hit all 3 rounds. The third one was a high shoulder shot and dumped it right where it stood. So even at that relatively long range, longest shot I've taken on game, this was solid. It was comfortable to shoot. You can do it. Do you need a 338? No, you don't. So we've talked about cartridges and calibers and recoil. Recoil, take all, carry the rifle you're comfortable in shooting. Don't base that on shooting a 0 at the bench, because a bench setting is going to give you the most recoil you're ever going to get from that rifle. So make sure you burn up a couple of boxes in the sitting position, in the prone position, shooting off a bipod, shooting off a tripod. Get a feel for the recoil, and I think you'll find out you can take a lot more recoil from those positions than you can from the bench. Invest in a nice soft recoil pad that's going to soak up a lot of that energy, and just get used to it. That's what, if you want to hunt big game, you need a big rifle, you need to be prepared for it. So I hope this has been useful. I think a lot of different calibers can work for elk within limitations. If you're shooting those short 308 class of cartridges, 200 to 300 yards maximum. If you're shooting the standard length like the 280s, 3 to 4. If you're shooting the magnums, maybe 5 to 6. It's a shame to go out there and not be prepared for a long shot, especially if you're going with an outfitted hunt. You get a lot of money invested. And if the only shot you're going to get is a 400 or 500 yard shot, I think you should be prepared for it. If you have the right gear and the right experience, you can make that work. Thank you very much for watching.
Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah! That's all there is till next time.